Hi, I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us, an old friend of ours who's been on a couple of times. We don't have him on near enough. Dr. Laurence Kotlikoff, professor of economics at Boston University. Dr. Kotlikoff, thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
My pleasure, Greg. Happy to be here.
Well, yeah, I know you have a deep resume, but I want to talk about what you're currently doing. You are, of course, sponsoring or basically come up with the idea in Congress, a bipartisan bill called the INFORM Act. And basically, you're trying to get the government and the people and everybody else to wake up with this huge amount of indebtedness and things that we are on the hook to pay for into the future. A comprehensive measure of government indebtedness is what this bill is called. And, you know, you've been on here talking about what we're really on the hook for is, north of $200 trillion. That's not a mistake. That's not a crazy form of accounting. You've explained to us before that any graduate student would figure out what we're on the hook for the same way you did. Please tell us about the INFORM Act.
Okay, well, first of all your listeners can go to, and your viewers can go to www.theinformact.org. And what you'll see there is the bill, and I helped write the language, but it's a bipartisan bill that was originally sponsored in the Senate by Senators Kane. Senator Kane is a Democrat from Virginia, and Senator Thune, he's a Republican from South Dakota. So these two senators, who've now been joined by 6 other senators, so we now have 3 Democrats and 5 Republicans sponsoring the bill. And then there's a corresponding bill in the House. They're putting this forward. We need to get 60 senators because I think the House will go for the bill more easily than the Senate. So what I need to ask all your viewers here is to go to the informact.org, endorse the bill online if you'd like, but the main thing is to talk to your senators and get them to co-sponsor the bill. The bill has been endorsed, as you'll see at theinformact.org, by over 1,000 economists, and that list includes 15 Nobel Prize winners in economics. And it's very important to realize that, and people won't know this by just looking at the names, but I do from knowing the people, that we have economists there from the left and the right and the center. So there are actually probably more Democrats on this endorsement list than Republicans. So this is not some right-wing effort to cut Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid. It's not. There's no ulterior motive. What we have here is the entire profession, almost to a person, saying that the government's accounting is fallacious and that we need to put everything onto the books, that things like the obligation of the government to pay my mom's Social Security benefits every month, that's a real debt. It needs to be included. We can't just look at the trees and ignore the forest of indebtedness. And this fiscal gap accounting is what economic theory says to do. So we're calling on...
Just to make sure that people understand, this is in crazy time. Because I thought, well, it's just your numbers. You so aptly pointed out, no, it's not my numbers. It's what any graduate level student, not PhD, would figure out, hey, here's what our tax receipts are, and here's how much, we are on the hook for, and boing, I mean, it's just, more than $200 trillion, and that's what all these Nobel economists, and including yourself, you're a top-notch economist as well, all of you are saying, hey, this is the math. We're on the hook for a lot of money.
Yeah, this is really 10% of GDP going forward. It's about 57% of federal revenues every year. More is what we need to get rid of the fiscal gap if we want to pay for what we intend to spend. We need 57% more revenue coming forth from the federal government, being collected by the federal government. Or we have to, if we don't want to increase revenues, we have to cut spending by 37% for the rest of time, starting this year. So what this is saying is that the calculations, which are based on the CBO's, the Congressional Budget Office's most recent long-term alternative fiscal scenario projection, which was released a few weeks ago, shows that the country is in worse fiscal shape by many miles than Detroit. So the country is essentially bankrupt. And it's the economics profession is sending the equivalent of the letter that Einstein wrote to Roosevelt warning of the nuclear threat from Germany, that they might come up with a nuclear bomb, atomic bomb. This is the economics profession, with the exception of some people on the extreme sides of the political aisle saying, look, the country needs to do honest accounting. And the Congressional Budget Office, the General Accountability Office, the Office of Management and Budget, they are all effectively disguising the true problem through the basis of their accounting. So I would, Greg, hope that you'll get the director of the CBO on air with you and ask him why he's not doing this analysis. It takes about 5 minutes to put this analysis together. You should put it on the front of his website, what the fiscal gap is. It takes just their numbers, and you just...
What is the official? What do you think by all the economists and people like yourself, what's the real fiscal gap that we're...
Fiscal gap right now is $205 trillion. It's 10.4% of GDP on an ongoing basis. It's a staggering amount of money. The Italian fiscal gap is about 5% of GDP on an ongoing basis. Germany is actually also got about 5%. Those are very big numbers. 10% is just really, really awful. Russia, it's about 8%. Other countries like Canada and Australia and Chile, it's probably closer to 0%. They're in good fiscal shape. So this analysis, where you put everything on the books, all the assets, which are all the future taxes, but then you compare that with all the liabilities that are coming due, which is all the spending commitments, not just to entitlement programs, but also to defense spending, to infrastructure. Let's see if we are able to pay for this stuff or whether we're leaving enormous bills to our kids. And then let's figure out what to do to address this as adults, because we've been running by, what the definition of a Ponzi scheme is when you engage in fallacious accounting. That's really fundamentally what a Ponzi scheme is all about. And by hiding these debts, doing accounting that Enron would be embarrassed by, or that Madoff would be really embarrassed by, which is saying a lot. By doing that for 60 years, the federal government and both parties have participated, have left us in this terrible hole, left our children. And this is why you have people that are extreme liberals on this list of 1,000 economists, as well as extreme, pretty extreme conservatives. You've got Jeff Sachs from Columbia University, who's very liberal, and you have Glenn Hubbard, who was the head of the Council of Economic Advisors under President George W. Bush, also on that list of endorsers. You've got an amazing list of economists, people from all the top schools, MIT, Stanford, Harvard, you name it, Princeton, have endorsed this bill, and 15 Nobel Prize winners. Never in the history of this country have so many top economists from all political persuasions and 15 Nobel Prize winners ever endorsed a piece of legislation. Now, we put an ad in the New York Times back in October, a full-page ad. And if you go back to page 9 of October 22nd's New York Times edition, the physical newspaper, you'll see the entire list of 1,000 economists, the 15 Nobel Prize winners. George Shultz endorsed the bill. Michael Boskin, the former head of the Council of Economic Advisors under the first President Bush. Very prominent people, former director Jim Miller, director of the OMB. And how many people in the press wrote about it? Did any of the reporters of the New York Times write about a full-page ad? Did anybody from the Wall Street Journal? Did anybody from any of the major media outlets?
And that's just absolutely. Listen, it's one thing to have conspiracy theories on the internet. It's quite another thing to have all the people that you talked about, Nobel Prize winners, 1,000 top economists, right and left. That is stunning to me. That's a story. I looked in the mainstream media. That's a story. It's a legitimate source story, which is why I wanted to have you on. And let's get to the point. We know. Listen, you came loaded for bear. You have a case. You have sources. You have dozens, hundreds of sources that say this is a problem. What happens if we don't get this under control?
Well, the government is already printing mountains of money to pay for its bills. The Federal Reserve is printing 29 cents out of every dollar that Uncle Sam is spending. They're just printing it out of thin air. So when countries are printing so much money and they're so broke so that there's no prospect over time of coming up with the taxes to cover the spending, no political agreement, you start ending up with somebody eventually recognizes this and starts dumping the bonds, and interest rates go up and inflation takes off, and then you're off to the races. We're talking about the kind of behavior you would expect from Zimbabwe, and we're seeing it right in front of our eyes. Chairman Bernanke of the Federal Reserve calls this quantitative easing, but what he's really doing is easing the burden on Congress from being fiscally responsible. And he's taking also the burden off the president. If he wasn't paying for, coming up with 29 cents on the dollar, the debt in the hands of the public would be that much higher, and it would be more apparent what's going on. So somebody at some point on Wall Street is going to wake up to this reality. Bill Gross did for a while, and then he went off and tried to sell bonds short, and that didn't work out for him. So I don't think he's talking about the realities too much anymore. But
the realities are real. Just because the short-term trading strategy didn't work, this is math.
The Wall Street guys aren't exactly the great prognosticators of what's coming, because they're worried about losing money on their own. If they lose money together in a bunch, in a crowd, in a herd, then they still retain their jobs. If they go off and lose money on their own, that's a problem for them. They lose their jobs. So I recently spoke to a group of about 50 bond traders for a very major mutual fund company, and they were interested in two things. What were the fundamentals, and what did other bond traders think? That was what they were concerned about primarily. When were the other bond traders going to flip to dumping U.S. Treasuries and causing the next potentially recession? We can have a recession and inflation at the same time. We saw that in the 70s. We saw that in Germany in the 20s and Hungary after World War II. We can have hyperinflation, and we've got enough money out there potentially to produce hyperinflation.
I want to talk about Obamacare. I mean, I'm reading in the newspaper. This is an AP story. And they're talking about one of the examples, a good example of Obamacare, and they're getting on Medicaid. And no kidding, the guy says, well, if I see a doctor, I pay $1. And if I go to the hospital, I pay $5. And I'm thinking, who is picking up the tab? And that's, again, we're exploding. Isn't Obamacare going to explode the federal deficit? Isn't this taking it, at least on the spending side, the wrong way? We can't just tax everybody's income to zero.
Well, so I think everybody needs to have a health insurance policy, and I think the government has to be involved because the health insurance industry has made a mess of things. That's why we have 50 million people uninsured. I do not believe that Obamacare was the right way to go. I think what we've now done is kind of balkanized the health insurance sector, where we have Obamacare, we have Medicare, we have Medicaid, we have employer-based health care. The federal government is paying for 3 of those programs pretty much directly, and the employer-based health care is also a huge government expenditure, because when my employer, like Boston University, pays for my premiums, health insurance premiums, it's not part of my taxable income. So there's a huge tax break, and that's in effect an expenditure. So we've got the government spending money on all these programs to insure the public in the most inefficient way. And you're right, the way the Obamacare system was set up, it could explode in cost. There are a lot of arguments for why that would happen. And what we really need is a very simple, rationalized system. I put it together in a proposal called the Purple Health Plan, which is at the purplehealthplan.org. And that plan has been endorsed by lots of economists, including 5 Nobel Prize winners. So economists, if you leave this to economists, if we could get the economists to spend a couple days in Washington, we could fix healthcare, we could fix Social Security, we could fix...
You wouldn't be nearly as rich, though. You wouldn't be getting free dental and paying $1 for a doctor, and it wouldn't be nearly as... We'd
have to put a limit. Everybody would get the basic policy base, and the in the form of a voucher that they can take to an insurance company to buy the basic policy. The insurance companies would have to offer exactly the same policy, and what would be covered would be such that the cost of all the vouchers would not exceed 10% of GDP ever. So we'd have a limit on the total spending. We'd have to ration what the government would actually provide people, and the voucher would be based on your pre-existing condition. Now, so if you had diabetes, you'd get a much bigger voucher than if you were healthy, so that the insurance companies wouldn't be cherry picking. That's it in a nutshell.
That would be cheaper. I mean, what they have now is crazy time.
That would shave off probably 50% of our fiscal gap right there, and it would save our kids, and everybody would have a basic policy. And if you're rich, you would buy a supplemental policy, and we turn health insurance into a simple commodity where it wasn't, different, a bronze, a gold, and a platinum, whatever policies. It would be just the same simple policy for everybody.
And then you'd have to pay some co-pays and some deductibles. I mean,
some co-pays and deductibles, but the government would basically pay for the voucher, but it would use an efficient tax system. So there are proposals that I've written, others, for very simplified ways to fix simple ways to fix the tax system that is also a crazy mess.
And you wouldn't also have to have the IRS involved wading into everybody's personal information, which a lot of people don't realize, but it's pretty much been revealed that, and this is not hasn't been a big issue yet, and that is it's basically destroyed HIPAA. I mean, there's no privacy anymore. I mean, the government was at the border to stop people and knew their health care and knew their health statistics, stopping people at the border recently. The IRS knows far too much, and I think people on both sides of the aisle don't feel real comfortable with the IRS knowing all your medical information.
Yeah, I think that what Snowden did is in many ways very valuable, showing that NSA and other agencies are going seemingly overboard. We don't know the other side of the story, how many terrorist attacks have been prevented from this, so we're in a
according to the outgoing NSA director, one, perhaps two, his exact quote, one, perhaps two.
If they were really big, it's a tough call. I'm sure the president has a tough decision about balancing this. He's a lawyer, right? And he's concerned about civil rights and privacy. So I don't know exactly where I come down on this whole issue here of that, but I am concerned the government's going overboard. We've seen that in the past. We saw the McCarthy hearings in the 50s. We've seen the government abuse its information and its powers, and that will happen again unless we put into place laws that will be reasonable and protect us.
In closing, I just want to get in closing that do you see there's a lot of chatter on the internet that, and one of the things that what you told me on the pre-interview was, I'm surprised it's gone on as long as it has. And my friend, Doctor, you are in good standing. Other very well-known money managers and economic professors and PhDs, former assistant treasury secretaries have all uniformly said, unsolicited, I'm surprised it's gone on as long as it has. Do you see this cannot go on the way it is now? And I'm not saying that you should call a crash as imminent, but isn't this going to crash at some point?
This will crash, or, there's different ways for cancer to kill you. It can be very gradual. Every year you get a little bit sicker until you finally, expire. Or it can attack some organ and you can die overnight. I think, either of those outcomes can happen, but we're certainly experiencing up till now a slowly growing cancer that we're not recognizing. And it's going to not only destroy us, but our children. And exactly when and how is not clear, because those bond traders on Wall Street are really thick as boards when it comes to seeing realities, or they're not so thick, but they don't really focus on the fundamentals. They just focus on what other people are thinking on the market.
They think they can run out of the building the first to smell smoke and leave everybody.
Yeah, they just want to beat the crowd out the building, out of the door, and they want to make sure they don't move too quick because
that's a risky plan, my friend.
It is, yeah.
That's a risky plan.
We can't trust Wall Street to give us guidance here. We have to trust. If we had a viral outbreak, swine flu, we would be listening to the doctors from CDC, Center for Disease Control, listening to what they said. what we have here is the entire economics profession, with the exception of people like Paul Krugman and some people on the far right, saying the government has been lying about our fiscal position. We have to have honest accounting, and then we have to figure out what to do. This doesn't mean we need to tear away social insurance and social protection, because you have people on the left and the right here. But what I'm going to ask your viewers to do is to call their senators, get in touch with the head of the Congressional Budget Office, demand that this fiscal gap accounting be done immediately. Get in touch with the head of OMB, get in touch with the head of the GAO, demand that this be done, and demand the senators take action and support this bill.
You might want to call this End the Fantasy Accounting Act. Really?
Yeah.
All right. The Inform Act. You are Professor Kotlikoff at Boston University. Thank you so much for shedding light on this big picture story. Thank you very much for being on USA Watchdog.
My pleasure. Thank you.